And welcome to PressTV's debate. I'm Marzi Hashemi. Well, after only 2 days of U.S. President Donald Trump being in office, Israelis have announced the expansion of 566 settlement units on occupied Palestinian land. Now, the head of the Jerusalem municipality says he was told to wait until former U.S. President Barack Obama leaves before announcing the new settlement construction plans. Settlements in the occupied territory are illegal under international law. Is this a sign of what is to come under a Trump presidency?
Israel has approved building permits for more than 560 new settler units in East Jerusalem Al-Quds. Interestingly enough, the announcement was made just 2 days after Donald Trump was inaugurated as a new U.S. president. Chairman of Jerusalem City Hall's Planning and Building Committee has even confirmed that the permits were held up until Barack Obama left office. Israel's tense relationship with Obama was exacerbated last month after Washington refused to veto a UN Security Council resolution demanding Israel end settlement activities in the occupied Palestinian land. Trump had called for the resolution to be vetoed. Just a few days before leaving the White House, Obama openly criticized Israel over the settlement activities. He said the policy of expanding settlements is among the reasons behind the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
We are reaching a tipping point where the pace of settlements during the course of my presidency has gotten so substantial that it's getting harder and harder to imagine an effective contiguous Palestinian state. And I think it would have long-term consequences for peace and security in the region and the United States because of our investment in the region.
Trump pledged strong support for Israel in his presidential campaign, and Israel is already taking advantage of it by pushing through settlement plans. The United States is Israel's most important ally, providing it with more than $3 billion per year in military aid. Now it seems that under Trump, this support will get even stronger. All Israeli settlements are illegal under international law, but despite international calls to abandon the policy, the Israeli regime continues to go ahead with the unlawful practice. Some Israeli ministers have also called for the formal annexation of Ma'ale Adumim, one of Israel's largest settlement blocks in the occupied Palestinian territories. And all this is happening without any practical action from the international community.
I think, yes, they are counting on the American silence, at least, or even encouragement for the settlements, but not to take any actions or even to criticize the building of settlements in the West Bank and particularly in Jerusalem. Yet, the international community is not taking any actions, as a matter of fact, in spite of the United Nations resolution.
Over 500,000 Israelis live in more than 230 illegal settlements built since the 1967 Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem Al-Quds. Analysts believe that the presence and continued expansion of such settlements are one of the main obstacles to efforts aimed at establishing peace in the Middle East. This is because the settlements are built on land the Palestinians regard as part of their future state. The same issue was among the main reasons for the collapse of the last round of the so-called Middle East peace talks in 2014.
I'd like to welcome my guest to the program out of Madison, Wisconsin, Dr. Kevin Barrett, editor of Veterans Today. And out of Washington, D.C., Mr. Lawrence J. Korb, U.S. Foreign Policy and National Security Analyst. Thank you both for being with us. Starting us off in D.C., Mr. Korb, do you think former U.S. President Barack Obama was actually anti-Israel? Because throughout his 8 years, we saw continued support for Tel Aviv and silence during their wars against the Palestinians. However, one of his government's last acts at the UN was abstaining as the Security Council condemned Israel for building in occupied territory. What do you make of all of that?
Well, I don't think that President Obama was anti-Israel or any other president who preceded him. If you go back and you take a look, presidents going back to the Reagan administration and the Carter administration, I should say, have encouraged Israel not to build those settlements, and they have tried to bring about peace between the Israelis and Palestinians. There were two good deals under President Clinton that the Palestinians walked away from, which would have established the 1967 boundaries with agreed upon land swaps. Yasser Arafat walked away from it. You had Prime Ministers Ehud Barak and Olmert basically making the same deals to the Palestinians before Prime Minister Netanyahu took over. So there have been a lot of mistakes in the past, and I think President Obama, on his way out of office, by not vetoing that resolution, was sending the same signal that lots of his predecessors did to the Israelis, that if you continue to do this, it won't be good for you, because it'll be very difficult for you to have a Jewish state and a democratic state. And this is something Secretary Kerry said in his final speech before he left office.
All right, well, let me get Mr. Barrett in on this. Your take: during the last month of Obama's presidency, Israel put the plan for increasing settlements on the back burner and waited until the new American president, Donald Trump, came to power. What exactly does this mean in your perspective?
Well, I do think that the list of American presidents who have essentially held the same position, that is, officially saying that they support an end to Israeli settlements and ultimately a two-state solution, essentially based on the territorial situation before the 1967 war. That's true. That has been the official position of every U.S. president up till now. But the important issue here is that the U.S. has been supporting Israel to the tune of literally more than $1 trillion, according to a study by the Christian Science Monitor. Some studies now say over $2 trillion total has essentially been bled from the American taxpayer and the American economy to support this state of Israel. So then the question becomes, if the United States has this official position, why is it that Israel has been able to continue to ethnically cleanse Palestine, build settlements, and violate the not only the U.S. policy, but the essentially unanimous international view of things, which again is that there should be a two-state solution going back to the pre-1967 boundaries. And the answer to that is that the Zionist power configuration, which is what sociologist James Petrus calls it, essentially owns Washington, D.C. Jewish Zionists give approximately 50% of the campaign funding, which is a euphemism for bribes, that keeps the American political process such as it is going. There's a massive Jewish Zionist presence in Hollywood, completely owned by Jewish Zionists. As Joel Stein said, there's virtually not a goy to be found in any important position anywhere in Hollywood, and that's true to a slightly lesser extent of the rest of the media. So essentially, Zionists own Hollywood, own the media, own the political process, and have a dominant influence in our financial structure as well. So they have a stranglehold on the United States of America. That's why, even though at the top political level, the U.S. is forced essentially to more or less mouth the international consensus, the complete control of the United States by this Zionist lobby prevents the U.S. from enforcing that by saying to Israel, you are going to have to go back to those pre-1967 borders, or we're going to cut off all of your money. And that's what the U.S. needs to say, should have said a long time ago, but it can't, because we are, again, owned by Zionists. We need a revolution in this country, I think, to overthrow this Zionist power configuration that's killing our country, that staged the 9/11 coup d'etat in order to destroy 7 countries in 5 years and pave the way for Israeli expansion.
I'm going to cross over to our Facebook wall and get, let's look at some of the comments that some of our viewers have sent to us on this subject.
It's much likely that Israel's settlement activities will expand. The right-wing project of the Israeli government will be emboldened under another right-wing populist as the president of a nation in the West. If an African country refuses to abide by the UN Security Council, they will label its leader as a dictator. Let them continue, but Jerusalem belongs to Palestinians. Israel is undoubtedly an occupier, and if the US goes along with Tel Aviv, it may have some serious consequences in the long term. Jerusalem is the undivided capital of Israel and is not negotiable. If you don't like it that way, then you can do what you know is the best. I mean, terrorism. I'd say yes, Israel's settlement will expand on the Trump administration. It does seem like Trump is a Zionist, unfortunately. Trump and Bibi will defy the word and approve criminal activities against the true owners of the Palestinian land. Israel has never respected international law because they aren't even a country, a bunch of criminals dragged into the Middle East by Britain to put the situation in an infinite war.
What about that, Mr. Korb? You heard some of our comments from our viewers. One of them saying basically that Donald Trump is a Zionist. But I'd like to ask you, why actually does it make a difference which American president is in office or not? Isn't international law regardless of who's in power?
Well, I think one has to be very careful about the difference between what Mr. Trump has said in the campaign and what he actually does. He's backed off on a lot of positions already, and I assume when he gets his new team in the Defense Department and in the State Department and in the CIA, they're going to make it clear to him that the positions that a lot of his predecessors have make a great deal of sense. And again, I think it's important to keep in mind, throwing around these numbers about how much, the United States just signed a 10-year deal to provide military assistance to Israel for $38 billion, not trillions, and the provision is they have to buy the equipment in the United States. So I'm not quite sure where this numbers of trillions come. And if you look at the opinion polls in this country, the majority of younger Jewish people do not support some of these policies that some of the older groups do. And even after Secretary Kerry's speech in Israel, Ehud Barak, who had been prime minister and defense minister for Netanyahu and is a retired military officer, he said the majority of people in Israel supported what Kerry was saying. So I think you're going to see, some changes as the political dynamics in Israel changes.
Okay. What about that, Mr. Barrett? How do you see this new Trump cabinet? I mean, we know that Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, is actually pretty Zionist and seems to have a lot of influence over his father-in-law. And we already are hearing Trump talking about moving the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Your take, sir?
Right. I think Trump is very much the creature of Zionist organized crime. He got his first job essentially from the Meyer Lansky mob. His mentor, the man who set him up in business, was Ray Cohn, a notorious mobster connected to Meyer Lansky, and he was also the man behind McCarthyism. And Trump's first casinos, first hotels came from this organized crime syndicate, an ethnically Jewish organized crime syndicate with very close ties to the state of Israel that worked very, very closely with the Israeli Mossad. So I don't think it's a surprise that Trump has been mouthing these extreme kinds of positions, that he's putting Kushner, who is clearly, obviously part of the Jewish organized crime syndicate in New York, whose father went to prison for criminal activities, into this special advisor position. This is not unexpected, but it's a very, very bad sign. And the issue here, I agree with Mr. Korb that most of the American Jewish population now, and a significant but unfortunately diminishing segment of the Israeli population, the Jewish population there, doesn't agree with this endless ethnic cleansing, this endless expansionism, this refusal to negotiate in good faith, this continuation of building settlements. Over 500,000 people now installed in this blatantly stolen land that every single member of the international community says all has to go back to Palestine. But the problem is that there is this hardline faction, this Likudnik extremist faction, represented by Bibi Netanyahu and unfortunately probably Kushner and the organized crime figures around Trump, people like Sheldon Adelson and others. These extremists and criminals are absolutely bent on finishing the ethnic cleansing of Palestine under the fog of war. They want a big Middle East war so they can finish expelling Palestinians from the West Bank and take it all and make Jerusalem, as they say, quote unquote, their eternal undivided capital. And to do that, they're going to try to blow up or destroy the Masjid al-Aqsa, the greatest Islamic architectural monument and second or third holiest.
Okay.
So we're facing the possibility of a World War III here because of the seizure of power by a group of extremists who do not represent world Jewry. They do not represent Jews in the United
All right,
States.
stay with me,
they're
Mr. Barrett.
fanatics, and we need to stand up to them and make sure that they are stopped.
Well, Mr. Korb, how do you see the U.S. supporting like illegal settlements fit into the narrative, Trump's narrative of let's make America great again agenda? I mean, does it mean that in order for the U.S. to be great, that it needs to go against international law?
No, I don't think so. In fact, if you heard his inauguration speech, he said, we're spending too much, taking care of other people. So it's going to be interesting to see, how he applies that to different countries. And he said we need to focus on our problems here at home. So as I say, he said a lot of contradictory things. We're going to find out what how he governs. And I think if you take a look, for example, at General Mattis, who has been confirmed as Secretary of Defense, he doesn't share a lot of these positions. He espouses the more traditional position of, let's have the 67 borders with agreed upon land swaps. We don't know what Mr. Tillerson is going to do, but he's a very, practical person, and I think he'll realize that you can't have, a Jewish state and a democratic state unless you change. So we'll have to see what these people, what these people do. I don't know the influence of his son-in-law, but he's dealing with a lot of other issues other than the Middle East and Israel. But as I mentioned before, Mr. Trump, President Trump, is a very practical man, and I think if he can get a deal that satisfies both the Israelis and the Palestinians, he'll push for it. And remember that, Abbas needs to get control of groups like Hamas before he can negotiate the way that he needs to.
Well, Mr. Barrett, how do you, when we look in perspective, when we talk about Trump, and he says that he doesn't want the U.S. involved in a lot of places and wars. He talked about allies actually trying to pay their own way. So what is the interest then of Washington in being so close to the Zionist regime and especially backing something that is illegal according to the United Nations, the expansion of these settlement units?
Well, the United States has no interest whatsoever in backing Israel in any way, shape, or form, least of all in these insane, ultra-expansionist, arguably genocidal policies. There's no American interest in that. We've heard lies from Zionist apologists claiming that somehow Israel is America's aircraft carrier in the Middle East, a beacon of democracy, and so on. That's nonsense. Israel is hated by all its neighbors. It's the least democratic country in the world because it has ethnically cleansed the majority of the people who should be voting in its elections and made them ineligible to vote. It's a Jewish superiority apartheid state. It's the only real ethnocracy left in the modern world where your ethnicity and religion make you a first-class or a second or third-class citizen. And this is all absolutely contrary to American values and indeed the Enlightenment values of the West and the modern values of the international community. So Israel is a throwback to a kind of a Nazi-style, extreme spin-off from 19th century European nationalism. And the problem, though, is that there is this hardcore of extremists among the Jewish Zionist elite who are pushing this sort of biblical project that, they believe that Yahweh, their God, gave them everything from the Nile to the Euphrates, and Jerusalem is their eternal undivided capital, and they need to destroy the Masjid al-Aqsa and put up their temple so they can start sacrificing pink heifers.
All right, stay with me. I don't have a whole lot of time, but I just want to get Mr. Korb in here. Your perspective, Mr. Korb, what are the possible ramifications of all of this if Israel actually feels even more empowered than it has already been and becomes even more aggressive with its settlements, as well as its overall oppression against the Palestinians?
Well, as Secretary Kerry pointed out, if they continue to do that, they're not going to have a democratic state or a Jewish state. And while it's certainly true that a lot of the Palestinians who live in Israel don't have all the rights, close to 2 million do right now, and they vote. You may remember in the last election, Prime Minister Netanyahu came out and tried to, tell a lot of the Palestinians or non-Jewish people, that they were voting too much and the Israelis had to get out more. So I think that's the real issue for them, and that's why I said after Kerry's speech, Ehud Barak said the majority of people agree with Kerry, so we'll just have to see what happens in Israel.
All right, and Mr. Barrett, your take on that, possible ramifications if Israel actually continues to feel even more empowered. From the Palestinian side, from the Muslim countries, are we going to look at a possible major blowback that Trump and others could not have even imagined, or how do you see that side of things?
Well, indeed, it's not only utterly unacceptable to the whole Islamic world that this ethnic cleansing of the Holy Land continue. It's unacceptable to the entire world, as laid out in a whole series of UN resolutions. We have to remember that there are 4 billion Abrahamic monotheists in the world. And of those 4 billion, the vast majority are, in fact, Christian or Muslim, not Jewish. In fact, only 1 out of every 266 Abrahamic monotheists who holds this as their sacred land in the world is Jewish. 1 out of 266. The other 265 are either Christian or Muslim. And yet this Jewish Zionist movement has said that that Holy Land is only theirs. Everybody else has to be expelled or subjugated.
20 seconds,
and indeed,
sir.
that handful of Palestinians who remain within the borders of Israel have been subjugated. Yes, they vote, but they're a tiny minority of the population. The vast majority, more than 90% of the Palestinian population is not allowed to vote, and most of them have been ethnically cleansed and forced to live in concentration camps outside of their homeland.
Well,
so,
I appreciate. I'm so sorry I have to interrupt, but I'm out of time. I appreciate. Appreciate both of you guys being with us. Dr. Kevin Barrett, editor of Veterans Today, out of Madison, Wisconsin, and Mr. Lawrence J. Korb, U.S. Foreign Policy National Security Analyst out of Washington, D.C. And as always, viewers, we appreciate you being with us on another debate. I'm Marcia Hashemi signing out for myself and all the group right here in Tehran. Thanks so much, and see you next time.